Nestled in a picturesque suburban landscape, the neighborhood was a tapestry of well-manicured lawns, charming houses with perfectly painted shutters, and tree-lined streets that invited leisurely strolls. This idyllic setting, however, was governed by an all-powerful homeowners association, or HOA, which enforced a strict code of conduct designed to maintain the aesthetic appeal and property values of the community. Residents were required to adhere to an extensive list of rules. Everything from the height of grass allowed in front yards to restrictions on holiday decorations. While some appreciated the order that the HOA provided, others found themselves feeling stifled by its rigidity. The monthly meetings often turned into battlegrounds where disputes were settled with the fervor of courtroom dramas, and no one knew this better than the residents who had clashed with the notorious HOA Karen. This self-appointed enforcer of the community guidelines was known for her unyielding demeanor and penchant for reporting any perceived infractions, no matter how trivial. Her reputation preceded her. Whispers of her escapades circulated among neighbors who had been on the receiving end of her relentless scrutiny. As residents navigated life under the watchful eye of the HOA, they often found themselves balancing their desire for personal expression against the suffocating regulations that dictated their lives. Little did they know that one fateful incident would turn these dynamics upside down and spark an unforgettable series of events involving packing peanuts and unexpected consequences. Meet Sarah, the protagonist of our story. A single mother in her late 30s, she moved to the neighborhood 3 years ago, seeking a fresh start for herself and her young son, Ethan. With a background in graphic design, Sarah had always dreamed of owning a home that reflected her creative spirit. When she stumbled upon a charming 2-story house adorned with vibrant flowers in the front garden, she knew it was the place where she could finally plant her roots. Sarah's personality is an intriguing blend of resilience and optimism. She approaches life with a can-do attitude, often finding joy in the little things, like weekend projects that transform her garden or spontaneous craft sessions with Ethan. Her home quickly became a sanctuary filled with warmth, laughter, and colorful artwork that showcased both her talent and love for creativity. In the community, Sarah was known as the friendly neighbor who would lend a hand when needed. She organized seasonal block parties and was always ready to share stories over backyard barbecues. However, this open-hearted nature didn't sit well with everyone, particularly the HOA Karen, who viewed Sarah's free-spirited approach to home aesthetics as a deviation from the neighborhood's strict standards. Sarah's home symbolized not just her personal journey, but also a subtle challenge to the rigid norms imposed by the HOA. As she navigated the complexities of suburban life, little did she know that her cheerful existence would soon collide dramatically with the HOA's authority, igniting an unexpected conflict that would change everything. In stark contrast to Sarah's warm demeanor, the HOA Karen, whose real name was Margaret, epitomized the archetype of a community watchdog gone rogue. A retired school principal in her 60s, Margaret wielded her authority within the HOA with an iron fist. Her passion for rules and regulations bordered on obsession, making her infamous among the neighborhood's residents. With her perfectly coiffed hair and a penchant for tailored blazers, she was always impeccably put together, embodying the very image of propriety she sought to enforce. Margaret's personality was a complex mix of self-righteousness and a misguided sense of duty. She believed wholeheartedly that her role was to protect the integrity of the community, often viewing deviations from the established norms as personal affronts. Her history of aggressively enforcing rules was well documented. Residents recounted tales of receiving warning letters for minor infractions like flower arrangements that didn't match the HOA's approved palette or decorative flags that were deemed too colorful. While some neighbors tolerated her antics out of fear of fines or public reprimand at HOA meetings, others found themselves embroiled in disputes that escalated quickly. Margaret had a knack for turning minor disagreements into full-blown confrontations, often rallying fellow board members to support her cause. Yet beneath her stern exterior lay a deep-seated need for control and validation, stemming from years spent managing unruly classrooms. As she patrolled the streets with a watchful eye, it became evident that Margaret would stop at nothing to maintain her grip on the neighborhood's standards, setting the stage for an explosive encounter with Sarah that would soon unfold. The incident that turned Sarah's life upside down began on an unassuming Saturday morning. Sarah had decided to host a small open house for her art, showcasing her recent projects and inviting neighbors to connect over snacks and creativity. She was excited to share her passion, believing it would help foster community spirit. However, unbeknownst to her, Margaret had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for a chance to pounce. Margaret had been increasingly frustrated with Sarah's unconventional approach to home decor, particularly the vibrant colors and eclectic styles that adorned her front porch. In her mind, Sarah's free-spirited nature was a direct challenge to the HOA standards. The open house was the final straw for Margaret, who viewed it as an affront to the neighborhood's carefully curated image. Fueled by a mix of jealousy and a sense of duty, she hatched a plan that would shock everyone. As guests arrived at Sarah's home, they were greeted with laughter and artistic displays. Meanwhile, Margaret orchestrated her bizarre act of revenge. Late that evening, she enlisted the help of several HOA members to fill Sarah's house with packing peanuts while she was away. They spent hours emptying bags of the lightweight foam into every corner of the home, turning it into a chaotic sea of white. When Sarah returned later that night, she was met with an overwhelming wave of disbelief and frustration. The packing peanuts were more than just a prank. They represented Margaret's relentless need for control and her unwillingness to accept any deviation from her vision of perfection. Little did Margaret know that this reckless act would set off a chain reaction with consequences neither she nor Sarah could have anticipated. As Sarah stepped through her front door, the first thing that struck her was the silence. The vibrant buzz of the open house faded into an eerie stillness. Confused, she flipped on the lights and was immediately engulfed by a blizzard of packing peanuts swirling around her feet, cascading in drifts that seemed to multiply with each step she took. Her heart raced as disbelief washed over her, morphing into a mix of shock and outrage. "What on earth?" she gasped, staring at the chaotic scene. Her once welcoming home now felt like a bizarre nightmare, a surreal representation of the hostility she had never expected from her neighborhood. The bright colors of her artwork were swallowed by an unending sea of white foam, and the aroma of baked treats lingered awkwardly amidst the chaos. Frustration bubbled to the surface as Sarah's thoughts turned to Margaret. She felt a deep sense of betrayal. This was more than just a prank. It was a calculated attack on her home and her spirit. How could she do this? Sarah muttered under her breath, recalling all the passive-aggressive comments Margaret had made about her decor choices. In that moment, anger surged through her veins. The thought of confronting Margaret sent shivers down her spine. How could someone be so vindictive? As she surveyed the mess around her, Sarah realized that this incident wasn't just about packing peanuts. It represented a larger battle over individuality versus conformity in their community. Determined to reclaim her space and integrity, Sarah resolved that this was far from over. As the initial shock wore off, Sarah knew she had an overwhelming task ahead of her. The sight of packing peanuts scattered throughout her home was daunting. They clung to every surface, infiltrating nooks and crannies that she hadn't even considered. With a deep breath to steady herself, she launched into the cleanup process. The first step was to gather supplies. Armed with garbage bags and a vacuum cleaner, Sarah quickly realized that this would be no ordinary cleanup. The packing peanuts seemed to multiply as she worked, slipping through her fingers and scattering across the floor with every attempt to contain them. Hours turned into an exhausting marathon as she bent down repeatedly, scooping handfuls of the lightweight foam into bags while fighting back tears of frustration. In addition to the physical toll, the unexpected costs began to pile up. Sarah needed more vacuum bags than she had anticipated due to the sheer volume of packing peanuts clogging her machine. She also found herself replacing a few decorative items damaged in the chaos, further draining her already tight budget. As she tackled the mess, thoughts of Margaret's vindictiveness fueled her determination, but also brought waves of anger and helplessness. With each passing hour, fatigue set in, but Sarah refused to give up. She enlisted Ethan's help, turning the cleanup into a bonding experience as they shared laughter and made light of the absurdity of the situation. Together, they navigated their way through the chaos, slowly reclaiming their home from Margaret's spiteful act. Yet beneath the surface, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that reclaiming her space was only part of a much larger battle against the oppression of HOA rules and one woman's relentless need for control. News of the packing peanut incident spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, igniting a flurry of reactions among the residents. As Sarah began to piece her home back together, she quickly discovered that opinions on Margaret's actions were sharply divided. Some neighbors rallied around Sarah, expressing their outrage at what they deemed an outrageous and petty act. They sympathized with her plight, recalling their own run-ins with Margaret's strict enforcement of HOA rules. "It's just packing peanuts today. Who knows what she'll do next?" one neighbor remarked, shaking his head in disbelief. These supporters were eager to lend a hand, helping Sarah clean up or offering words of encouragement over coffee. However, not everyone shared this sentiment. Several residents were staunch supporters of Margaret, viewing her as a necessary guardian of the community's standards. "She was just trying to maintain order," one neighbor argued dismissively. "Rules are rules for a reason." This faction of the community seemed to believe that Sarah's open house had been a misguided rebellion against the HOA guidelines, framing Margaret's actions as a justified response to perceived chaos. As discussions unfolded at community gatherings and over backyard fences, it became evident that the incident had drawn a line in the sand. The neighborhood was now split between those who valued individuality and creativity, represented by Sarah, and those who favored conformity and adherence to rules, embodied by Margaret. This division heightened tensions within the community, setting the stage for future confrontations and forcing residents to confront their own values regarding freedom versus order in their shared living space. As the dust began to settle from the chaotic packing peanut incident, Sarah found herself contemplating the legal and financial ramifications of Margaret's bizarre act. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became that this was not just a petty prank, but a potential violation of her rights as a homeowner. Sarah consulted with a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. During their conversation, she learned about the concept of liability. If Margaret's actions were deemed intentional and malicious, she could be held responsible for the damages caused to Sarah's property. The attorney explained that this included not only the cleanup costs, but also any damage to personal belongings that had been caught in the mess. Furthermore, discussions about insurance claims began to surface. Sarah considered whether her homeowner's insurance would cover any of the damages or if she would need to pursue compensation directly from Margaret. The attorney advised her to document everything meticulously: photos of the mess, receipts for cleanup supplies, and notes on conversations with neighbors who had witnessed Margaret's behavior. Meanwhile, the HOA board began to gather for an emergency meeting to discuss the incident and its implications for their governance. They faced pressure from residents who were increasingly concerned about Margaret's actions and their potential liability as an organization. The board contemplated whether disciplinary action against Margaret was necessary, weighing the risk of lawsuits against maintaining their authority over community standards. As tensions simmered, Sarah realized that this incident could lead to significant changes in how the HOA operated. The specter of legal action loomed large, casting doubt on Margaret's standing within the community and forcing all parties involved to confront the consequences of one woman's impulsive decision. Determined to reclaim her narrative and confront the injustice she faced, Sarah began formulating a plan. The packing peanut incident had opened her eyes to the broader issues within the HOA, and she realized that simply reacting to Margaret's antics was not enough. She needed to take a proactive stance. First, Sarah reached out to supportive neighbors who had rallied around her after the incident. Over cups of coffee in her now-cleaned living room, they shared their own frustrations with the HOA's rules and Margaret's behavior. It became clear that many residents felt similarly stifled by the strict regulations and were eager for change. Inspired by their camaraderie, Sarah decided to organize a community meeting to address not only her situation, but also the overarching concerns about the HOA's policies. Next, she consulted her attorney again, discussing potential legal actions while also seeking advice on how best to frame the upcoming meeting. With their guidance, Sarah crafted a clear agenda that included discussing the implications of Margaret's actions and brainstorming ways to make the HOA more inclusive and responsive to residents' needs. At the meeting, held in the local community center, Sarah stood before her neighbors, fueled by a mix of anxiety and resolve. As she shared her story, detailing both the personal impact of Margaret's actions and the collective frustrations many felt regarding HOA oversight, a sense of empowerment filled the room. Residents began voicing their own experiences, sparking an animated discussion about how they could collectively push for policy changes that would allow for more personal expression while still maintaining community standards. In turning the tables on Margaret, Sarah began fostering a sense of unity and agency among her neighbors, laying the groundwork for meaningful dialogue about fairness and respect within their community. The community meeting marked a turning point for Sarah and her neighbors, as they united to voice their concerns about the HOA and Margaret's behavior. A sense of empowerment filled the room. The collective determination sparked action, leading Sarah to propose drafting a formal complaint against Margaret, holding her accountable for her actions. With the support of her neighbors, Sarah worked with her attorney to compile evidence of the incident, including photographs, witness statements, and documentation of the cleanup costs. Armed with this information, they filed a complaint with the HOA board, demanding that they address Margaret's misconduct and take appropriate action. As news of the complaint spread, pressure mounted on the HOA to respond. During the next board meeting, residents passionately voiced their frustrations while highlighting the need for accountability within their leadership. The atmosphere shifted as many expressed their discontent with Margaret's heavy-handed approach to enforcement, urging the board to reconsider their stance on community rules. Eventually, after much deliberation, the HOA board decided that Margaret would be held financially responsible for the damage caused by her actions. They agreed to cover Sarah's cleanup expenses and any additional damages incurred during the incident. This resolution not only signified a victory for Sarah, but also sent a powerful message throughout the community that bullying behavior would not be tolerated. Margaret was left with no choice but to accept her consequences, which included a formal reprimand from the board and an ultimatum about her future involvement in community matters. In reclaiming her home and standing up to Margaret, Sarah had inadvertently ignited a movement toward change in their neighborhood, one that encouraged open dialogue and respect for individual expression amidst shared standards. As Sarah stood in her now peaceful home, she reflected on the whirlwind of events that had unfolded over the past few weeks. What began as a shocking invasion of packing peanuts had transformed into a profound lesson about community dynamics and the power of collective action. The experience had not only challenged her, but had also fostered an unexpected sense of unity among her neighbors. Through conflict, Sarah learned that it was essential to stand up against unreasonable behavior, especially when it threatened the integrity of individuals within the community. She realized that the HOA, while designed to uphold standards, could become oppressive if left unchecked. By voicing her concerns and rallying support, she had sparked a movement that encouraged open dialogue and encouraged residents to advocate for themselves. Moreover, Sarah discovered the importance of empathy and understanding in conflict resolution. Engaging with her neighbors helped bridge divides and highlighted shared frustrations that had simmered beneath the surface for far too long. Rather than viewing Margaret solely as an antagonist, Sarah began to see her as a product of a system that valued conformity over individuality. This experience taught Sarah that community is about more than just rules. It's about connection, support, and mutual respect. As she looked around at her home, now a sanctuary filled with creativity and warmth, she felt a renewed commitment to fostering a neighborhood where everyone could express themselves freely without fear of retribution. The packing peanuts incident became a catalyst for change, igniting a spirit of resilience and collaboration that would define their community moving forward. In the months following the packing peanut incident, the impact of that chaotic night echoed throughout the neighborhood. For Sarah, the experience had not only reinforced her resolve to stand up for herself, but had also transformed her into a community leader. She took an active role in the HOA, advocating for more inclusive policies that encourage creativity while still honoring shared values. The sense of solidarity among residents grew stronger as they worked together to create a neighborhood that celebrated individuality rather than stifled it. Meanwhile, Margaret found herself in a precarious position. The fallout from her actions forced her to reevaluate her approach to community governance. With a reprimand from the HOA board hanging over her, she became more withdrawn, often seen attending meetings in silence rather than with her usual assertiveness. Though she retained her post on the board, the community's perception of her had shifted dramatically. Neighbors were now wary of her heavy-handed tactics. This incident served as a wake-up call, not only for Margaret, but for other residents who realized that blind adherence to rules could lead to resentment and division. As Sarah observed these changes, she felt a sense of hope for the future of her neighborhood. The incident had sparked vital conversations about respect, empathy, and the balance between order and personal expression. It was a reminder that even in tightly regulated environments, there is always room for compassion and understanding. With a renewed commitment to fostering a supportive community, Sarah and her neighbors moved forward together, knowing that standing up against unreasonable behavior could lead to positive change for all. The packing peanuts may have been a momentary disruption, but they ultimately paved the way for growth and unity in their shared home.